Good evening, fellow heretics. Welcome to a very special episode of Nerds and Heresy. Before we bring on our guest, I promised you guys an announcement, so we're going to do that now. When I went to the American Atheist Convention, I learned that they do not have a state representative for the state of PA or Pennsylvania. And well, that's me now. I'm the Pennsylvania state rep for American Atheists. Still going to be a while before I do anything. There's still a bunch of trainings I got to go through and all that. But yeah, part of what that entails is getting more involved in local politics, trying to get the atheists to be, find groups where they can be more active in local politics and everything. And I'll also be testifying for and against certain policies throughout our state representing American atheists. So that'll be fun. We'll see how that goes. I'm very nervous and excited. I've never done anything like this, but hey, it's something I wanted to do. And the reason I wanted to do that is because, well, I'm pissed off and motivated like many people. And a big reason that I'm motivated is because of this book, whose author is backstage, and we're going to talk to him about it. But first, let's watch that intro.
Hold on to your butts.
All right. Welcome, sir. Thank you for carving out some time in your very busy schedule to be with us.
It is my pleasure. And I think I get to be the first to publicly congratulate you. It's so exciting. Well deserved.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll see.
Your state needs it. Pennsylvania needs some help. So
it really, really does. And that's
Yes.
one reason where I'm like, you know what? I'm a stay-at-home dad. I don't have a job. My kids went back to school, so I've got all this free time. Like I could do this. There's no reason for. I don't have any excuses. I can do this. So I did, and yeah, a big motivation for that was your book, which is very infuriating. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's fucking phenomenal, dude. It's such a good book.
Well,
and it's you strike a really good balance in the book because you don't get really deep in the weeds with legal jargon. Like I have no legal training whatsoever, and I understood pretty much all of it. And if there's any times where you had to get into a little bit of it, you explained it. So it's very easy for the common person to read. But if you're a legal nerd, there's all kinds of good stuff in there for you too. Like your index in the back is like, I'm not a legal nerd, but if I was, this back portion would be a lot of fun.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think there are lawyers who love to sound like lawyers. They are the worst. There are lawyers who strive to communicate the law into terms that everybody can understand. And that was really what I was going for in this book, because I genuinely believe that we are at a crucial moment in American history. And if everybody does not understand it and join the fight against the crusade, the onslaught that we are facing, we are in big trouble. So this is meant for anybody to be able to pick up and read. And the book is American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. And this is, you just showed the advanced copy that I sent you a couple months ago now, but this is like the real deal hardback. My publisher just sent it to me. I am really excited about it.
Yeah, you had to make some changes. Like right after you sent it to me, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and you were like, "Yeah, I got to make some changes." So this is only one of a handful of these in print,
Yeah.
which means it's gonna make me a lot of money when I sell it to a pawn shop one day, right?
Yes, hopefully it does well enough that it will make you a lot of money. But yeah, no, I mean, it's really interesting because I knew as I was writing this, and I talk about the cases that the court did decide in June, these huge four really big cases, but three just enormous ones that touch on religious freedom. the abortion decision. There was a case out of Maine, and then the case about the coach imposing prayer onto students at a public school. I knew those were coming. And so my publisher and I had kind of talked about like, what is the best way to approach this? So those cases I talk about in here, but we didn't have the decisions then. So there's actually a free update up on my website, andrewseidel.com, that anybody who's bought the book will be able to go read. And then in the next editions, I will have worked all of that in. And we're going to keep doing that. Every time the Supreme Court does one of these, it will get an update. Maybe not every single time, but it's a work in progress. This is a living document, just like our Constitution is.
I was blown away when I read the bit about the soccer or the football coach prayer case. I was reading. I was like, didn't this just happen yesterday? How is it already at the point? Like, damn, he's fast.
Yeah, well, I knew it was coming, and it was sadly not difficult to predict, right? There's no suspense with this Supreme Court. And that's a really big part of what I tried to get at in the book basically, if you want to understand what is happening with religion and the law with our Supreme Court right now, you have to read American Crusade. And a big thing that I try to do is to unshackle people's minds from the idea that the Supreme Court is this impartial arbiter of truth and justice, because the crusade that I talk about really depends on people believing that myth. But McConnell and Trump and Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society, who plays a pretty sizable role in this book, they cheated and stole and packed the courts to put their collaborators in place, right? Not because they wanted people who would administer justice even-handedly, but because they wanted people who wouldn't, right? They put them on there to do exactly what they have been doing. So, American Crusade, I think, is like nothing that most people have probably read, because it's not a law book. It's exposing an attempt to warp our law and showing that these justices are eager and ready to take on these cases. They want to hear these cases, right? The Supreme Court gets to decide which cases it's going to hand down opinions on, and typically, rejects something like 99% of the cases. But it's decided all of these religious freedom cases that are coming its way, and it's deciding them always in favor of conservative Christians, Christian nationalists too. And so the simple fact is that this Supreme Court wants to decide these cases. And I think you and I have talked about this too, but the perspective that I have to offer is unique because I know what really happened in each of these cases, right? Like writing the coach stuff was easy because I know that case. I worked on it from the beginning when it was happening back in 2016. Not only did I live many of these cases and or follow them closely, this has been my whole career, right? I litigated some of these cases. I briefed others. I have been on the front lines defending our country from this assault for a decade.
Yeah, and before we get too deep into it, everyone watching, the link to purchase the book is in the description. You can actually purchase a signed copy through, what was the organization you were telling me about? They're helping you do that.
Yeah, this is really cool. This is the local bookstore here. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I have this really awesome local bookstore. It's really supportive of the community, really LGBTQ plus friendly. Black Lives Matter. It's called A Room of One's Own. And I've partnered with them to offer signed copies to anybody who wants one. So if you go to bit.ly/signedac, like signed American Crusade, signed AC, it'll take you to the portal, explains how you get a book. And basically you order through that local bookstore's website. And then when you're checking out, just say, I want a signed copy. I want Andrew to write, Dear Captain Dadpool, you're awesome, Andrew. And then I go in basically like once a week or so, and I'll sign a bunch of the books, and then the bookstore will mail them out. So you get to support local bookstores, you get to support me, you get a cool signed book. They make a fantastic gift, especially if you've got a Trumpkin in the family, might I say. Man. So yeah, anyway, yeah, good stuff.
All right. Well, again, the link to that's below. I already got mine. It's a little outdated now, but
still, the Crusade is still. The Crusade is the same. They're just doing more damage, right?
It is, and let's get into the words are hard. Let's get into that a little.
Sure.
You said I could read some quotes.
Please.
So this is from chapter 6. It's only a few sentences. The Constitution envisions religious freedom as a protection for minorities, not a weapon to maintain privilege. When hostility exists against non-Christians, as in the Muslim ban, the court does nothing. When hostility doesn't exist against conservative Christians, the court manufactures it to privilege their bigotry.
Yeah.
So what are some cases you can tell us about?
There are a lot. I mean, I think
there are a lot.
There are a lot. I mean, I think that the important thing that I really want people to understand, the overarching point that I am trying to make in the book, to wake people up to, is that there is a very well-funded, very powerful network of Christian nationalist organizations and judges that are working to weaponize the First Amendment. And that's what you were talking about in that quote. That's how they weaponize it. So they are turning the protection of religious freedom enjoyed by all into a weapon of Christian privilege for the select few. And this is a deliberate crusade that has been remorselessly waged for about a decade, with the groundwork laid for several decades prior to that. So superficially, I call this group collectively the Crusaders throughout, and I'm going to use that same language here. So the Crusaders' religious freedom challenges in court, they're superficially about things like Christian crosses and veterans, or about playgrounds, or private school vouchers, or bakeries and gay weddings, right? Like, that's superficially what they're about. And we can talk about those cases if you want, but really they're about religious privilege. Often about privileging religion over non-religion, Christianity over other religions, and then specifically the right kind of conservative Christianity over other Christians. And religious freedom can be, and this is kind of gets to one of the crucial points about why, which I think is something we can dive into more. Religious freedom could be their weapon to reclaim and retrench their lost and waning status as the dominant caste in the United States. So the goal really is to use religious freedom, which we have historically understood as something that's possessed by all equally, to elevate conservative Christianity above the law, to exempt conservative Christians from the law while disfavoring non-religious and non-Christian citizens who are then required to favor the law. And because they're rewriting the First Amendment, the weapon is really, really powerful. It can cut across every law. It is a trump card. It's a silver bullet. It's the golden ticket. Choose whatever metaphor you want. The point is that it trumps other rights and other people's rights. And that is what they really are seeking, this silver bullet for their privilege.
Absolutely. They're raging against the dying of their privilege, as you say in the book.
Yes. Yeah, that was... That's been a line of mine for a while, and I don't think I included it in the founding myth, but it really does have a place in American Crusade. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the ways they do that, and I think you were talking specifically about Fox News in this, is they make you feel threatened from the comfort of your own couch. Like your life is good. You're chilling. You probably got a beer in your hand. You got a full belly. You just ate dinner. You're watching TV, and they make you feel like you're in danger.
Yep.
How? So they got to make you scared.
Fear and demographic change really is one of the ways that they do that the most. I mean, that's Tucker Carlson talking about the Great Replacement theory bullshit, right? It's the caravans coming to the border.
Stormed or who marched in Charlottesville chanting, Jews will not replace us.
Yeah. I mean, it's, like we're going to hear about a caravan any day now because we have an election coming up. Like,
I'm surprised we haven't heard one yet.
I mean, maybe it's
happening. It's been like a whole week since there's been a caravan. It's weird.
But I mean, And I actually had a whole chapter on Fox News that I ended up having to cut from the book, and this strategy. I guess I didn't cut it; I condensed it down to a couple paragraphs. But then this is the crusade is largely a backlash against equality realized, right? So Christianity was once able to discriminate on the basis of race, and now that's largely unthinkable. Christianity was once able to legally subjugate half the population. That's not going to happen anymore. Christianity was once able to discriminate against LGBTQ people, but now it isn't. And as more people realize the rights due to them by virtue of being human, that sphere of religious imposition is shrinking. And what the crusade seeks to do is reclaim that lost ground. So let me just give you a couple of examples here, because it's really, they're worth having. So Obamacare, right? It expanded equality by recognizing the reproductive rights of Americans, American women. And Hobby Lobby's conservative white Christian owners fought against that expansion of rights under the guise of religious freedom. The Obergefell decision, right? Marriage equality, expanded equality by recognizing the rights of LGBTQ citizens to equal marriage. Masterpiece Cake Shop's conservative white Christian owner and a host of other businesses fought that expansion by claiming religious freedom. There's a case up at the Supreme Court already this term that is basically a redo of that case. We're going to see it again. And then you can go back even farther, like to Brown versus Board of Education, right? One of the great decisions in Supreme Court history, there aren't that many, expanded equality by recognizing the rights of Black Americans to equal access to public education. And then in the name of religious freedom, Christians pushed for school choice and vouchers and segregation academies. So white Christian Americans, especially conservatives, facing equality are acting like martyrs that are suffering for their faith. They feel that these expansions violate their rights, but parity is not oppression, right? And this is what Fox News takes advantage of, that conflation of equality with oppression. So all they have to do is talk about changing demographics or progress, and that, to borrow their word, triggers this fear response in conservatives. And there is something called in the academy called dominant group status threat, and that is intimately tied up with the crusade to weaponize religious freedom.
Sorry, I got distracted. My cat's.
That's okay. I'll keep going because losing the dominant status is such an important part of this, because the crusade is about privilege and supremacy, right? So religious freedom could be the Christian nationalist's weapon to reclaim and entrench that dominant caste status, to undo equality in the name of religious freedom. So the reason white Christians are fearful of the changing, white Christians are fearful, in part because Fox News is playing on that, of those changing demographics. And they're reacting to that fear to maintain the traditional white conservative Christian power structure. And that is what dominant group status threat is, that reaction, right? They're reacting. And so they're reacting to, white Christians ceasing to be the majority in America, which happened in 2014. The fact that white people are no longer going to be the majority in mid 2040s sometime. We had our first Black president. We now have a first Black female vice president, the increasing power of women, right? I mean, the loss of Roe is a backlash against that, and the rise of the non-religious, of course. So they feel threatened and are increasingly turning to anti-democratic, un-American, and unconstitutional means to reclaim their dominant status. And they're perverting this hallowed constitutional protection. And that's been really their most successful tool to date. And it's so unfortunate because our nation premises the religious freedom on an idea of equality. It promises us, everyone, the freedom to believe as they want. But our laws can't allow those beliefs to harm anybody else. And that's really what you're seeing flipped here. You're seeing them saying, not only do we get to believe whatever we want, we also get to act on those beliefs, even if it violates your rights, even if it makes you less than. This is one of the reasons that I wrote the book. It's one of the reasons I'm so proud to work at Americans United for separation of church and state, which brings together people of all religions and of none to fight in the courts and in the legislatures and in the public square for freedom without favor and equality without exception. And that's what our fight at AU is about. That's what the book is about. And I really hope everybody both joins AU and picks up a copy of the book. Are you done with your cast now? I can stop stumping. I can keep going.
He walked across my keyboard one day and like ended the stream. Tried to, like, really don't want that to happen during this interview.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's like they convince their audience that privilege is a finite resource.
Yeah.
And the more that other groups have, the less they're going to have, and don't realize it's not a finite resource. Everybody, people losing their shit because the Little Mermaid is black now. Like when did so many middle-aged white guys feel so passionately about the Little Mermaid that they're going to be like,
there's a very strange.
Who cares? Like,
well,
how does this affect you?
It's a mythical creature too.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing about like I am 100% going to watch the new Lord of the Rings. I just literally haven't had time to sit down on the couch and watch anything. I'm very excited to, but I saw like the passing, social media fight about like darker skinned hobbits or something. Like they're not real, everybody. Like they're mythical creatures. I get over
it. Kills me because it's like, and she's a mermaid. She would live underwater, so she wouldn't have the melatonin necessary to make her that dark. Like, oh, now you give a shit about science? Now you care about science. Where was this energy when we were having a pandemic and you didn't want to wear a fucking mask? Where was this energy? Now you're a science guy? Get fucked. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I just don't see how concern over the skin color of a being that does not exist and that we all agree doesn't exist, I mean, like, is anything other than racist. Like, I mean, you're obviously racist. I don't know. Anyway.
So the Supreme Court, like you were saying earlier, picks its own cases. This is something I actually didn't know. So I've never paid attention. So like I said, the book is very educational for me. As someone who knows fucking nothing about the topic. But yeah, like they pick their own what cases they want. And prior to Justice John Roberts joining the Supreme Court in 2010, it was sort of like 50-50 which cases they picked were religious and which ones they weren't, right? And then when he came on the case, he like reworked everything. It's almost reformed the First Amendment. I think even literally tried to.
So there's there's
like 30-80% or
the data. I include the data too, because like I don't want people to just take some liberal lawyers word
it's
for
all
what's
there.
happening. There's actually numbers to back this up, and I get to that right at the beginning of the book, and then I tell the stories basically behind those numbers. So I mean, and we talk about Supreme Courts by who the Chief Justice is. So you have the Roberts Court, you have the Rehnquist Court after Chief Justice Rehnquist, the Berger Court, the Warren Court, and Roberts came onto the court in 2005, and almost immediately after, like within a couple of weeks, Sam Alito was put on the court as well. And those were pretty significant personnel changes on the Supreme Court. And there was a little bit of a breathing period there before they started this crusade. But you can really date it to a 2010 case about a cross in the Mojave Desert. And so this is, 1 million acres, basically like a wilderness preserve, Mojave Desert, like 1 million acres. And there's a cross, a Christian cross put up in the middle of that. And that's not constitutional to display, to display the symbol of one religion on government land is to promote that religion, right? And we don't do that in this country. You are not allowed to use government power and privilege and offices given to you by we the people to promote your personal religion. You're just not. It's an abuse of power to do otherwise. So there was a lawsuit over that. And in response, and this is why the case is so strange. In response, Congress stepped in and said, we got this. Y'all don't worry about it. We got it. And they transferred that 1 acre. I don't even remember if it was a full acre, this tiny sliver of land under the cross to a private group with the understanding that that private group would keep the cross up. In fact, if the private group let the cross come down or tried to sell the land, it would automatically revert to Congress. Okay?
Mhm.
So the purpose of this congressional action, this congressional law, shall we say, was to keep a Christian cross up and make it appear as though the government was endorsing and promoting this cross. Now, the First Amendment is pretty clear. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That move is a law respecting an establishment of religion, right? That's not a hard argument to make. So the land transfer itself was challenged. And this is a sham. Everybody involved in this knows it's a sham. The whole point is to have a constitutional violation remain a constitutional violation. And if the court cared about upholding the Constitution and cared about the rule of law and enforcing it, it would have slapped down that sham land transfer immediately. It would not have countenanced it.
Would have laughed at it.
It would have laughed it out of court. It should have laughed it out of court.
It's the most ridiculous, yeah.
Correct. No, you're absolutely, but it didn't. It said that was okay. Mm-hmm. And that case really served as a signal. It really communicated to the wider Crusaders.
It set the tone.
It did, so exactly. So, when Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade in 1095, it was to cheers of Deus Vult, God wills it, God wills it. And this was the American Crusade's Deus Vult moment, right? This was John Roberts issuing his own call to arms and launching a crusade, albeit a different one. And the Christian nationalists and the conservative activists heard that call. So this network of faithful and well-funded activist groups, the Crusaders, together with those conservative justices on the Supreme Court, launched a crusade to weaponize religious freedom. And now, again, this is not a war of conquest, not of land, but the Crusaders are looking to conquer our Constitution and to remake it in their image. And that's what they're doing. That's what this crusade is all about.
Yeah. It said in 5-4 decision, Roberts approved the sham. Where was I going? What are some of the other ways that, like you were saying, it set the stage for things that would come? Like what? And he was very slow and methodical about this process. He didn't just come out of the gate like, guns ablazing. He was very cerebral.
He was. About it. This is his strength, Roberts, and he's a patient man, and he understands in a way that the other conservative justices on the Supreme Court do not understand. That the only capital this Supreme Court has is in its legitimacy, in the idea or the perception of the court as a legitimate institution. It's got no other power to enforce its decisions. It has to rely on the other two branches to do that and rely on its legitimacy to have the people want those decisions enforced. So there's two things to really touch on there. One is that Roberts is still very much a conservative, and the second is what's up with these other justices. And so let me do both of those real fast. Please. So Roberts is as conservative as Alito or Thomas or Barrett or Kavanaugh or Gorsuch. He is just for incremental conservative change, right? Like Roberts wants to slowly boil the frog to get to a weaponized religious freedom. Alito and the rest of them are like, bonfire torches. Like, let's just kill the frog right now. That they want to get to the same end point. But Roberts knows that to preserve the victories of the conservative legal movement, of this crusade, they have to do it slowly. Because if they do it too fast, we're going to wake up to what they're doing, why it's wrong, and the court is going to have a legitimacy problem. And that's hopefully where we are as a country right now, because this court needs to be checked. So that's one. Roberts, then let me, just to give people a taste of Roberts as being conservative. The Obergefell decision, which enshrined marriage equality. Sometimes when justices are feeling very passionate about a case, they will, when the decision is handed down, usually in June when we're talking about a very consequential or possibly earth-shaking case, sometimes the justices will read parts of their decision from the bench. And that is also true of the justices who don't agree with the decision and who dissent. They will read parts of their dissent from the bench. And John Roberts has only ever done that one time, and it was in the Obergefell case. Right? He is a deeply, deeply conservative man. You know, I tell the story about his career in this book in a couple paragraphs. You know, we have memos of him writing about, we have a long fight ahead of us to get prayer back into the schools. Right? And that's a legal memo he's writing as a White House lawyer. Right? And that's the language of a crusader. We fight prayer in schools. And so Roberts is very much a part of this crusade. He's just smarter about forcing change onto the country than the other justices. So, but the other piece of that puzzle is the court has been packed. The Supreme Court has been captured. Right? And Leonard Leo is universally recognized as the man who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. He ran the Federalist Society, which people have probably heard of, which is a conservative legal group that is basically a network of influence and power that raises up, young lawyers who could be stars in the movement to get them clerkships on the Supreme Court and eventually become judges and things like that. One former employee described Leo's mission like this. The employee said, Leo, quote, figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception, conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts. Okay, so that is what I'm talking about, right? Waning demographic power, right? Their dominant caste status evaporating. So they are looking for a way to enshrine minority rule, and they're looking around and they see the federal judiciary, right? They get lifetime appointments. Those judges can sit there. They're never going anywhere. They can enshrine minority rule for 50 years if they get enough people on the bench, especially if they get enough people on the Supreme Court. And that's what they did. So Leo also, his job when it came to picking these judges and selecting these judges was described as being the, quote, monitor of the various nominees' ideological purity. Ideological purity. Now, tell me that doesn't sound like a crusader, right? So
that is some Bond villain language right there.
Yeah. So Roberts and Alito are both nominated in 2005. Both are members of Leo's Federalist Society, and he played a crucial role in both of their partisan nominations. He wrote the lists that Trump chose judges from. So he is responsible for Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett, all members of the Federalist Society. Now, Clarence Thomas is a little before his rise to power, but Clarence Thomas is a longtime friend of Leonard Leo's and a member of the Federalist Society, too. So that is 6 votes on the Supreme Court, and Leo chose 5 of them for their ideological purity, a crusader ideology, right? That is where we are right now. That is what we are fighting against, and that's the story that I tell in the book, American Crusade.
Right. Yeah, it's reading through this book. It's what's most upsetting about it, I think, is how so much was done like right under our nose.
Yeah.
And like we either didn't pay attention or we did, and we just didn't think it was that big of a deal. And so they were able to just kind of shoehorn certain things in. And then when a big decision is made, like Roe v. Wade being overturned, we're like, how the fuck is this even possible? What happened to make this? Well, a lot happened to make that possible. We just weren't paying attention, and they were very smart about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. And I think part of it too is we have certain expectations and beliefs about our Supreme Court. We're taught in, U.S. public school system. If you went to law school, you're really drinking this Kool-Aid. And it is that the court is, a defender of the downtrodden, a vindicator of equality, a bastion of civil rights. And historically, and certainly now, that is not true at all. There have been maybe one really bright spot in the Supreme Court's history, 40 years, maybe that's pushing it a little bit, from Brown versus Board of Education on, really the Warren Court, where we did see actual progress. And we did see the expansion of civil rights, of equality. We saw the court acting in the way that we want it to act. But for the rest of its history, the Supreme Court has done a miserable job of all of those things. It really, really has. I talk about in the book some of the historical analogs to the period that we have entered with this Supreme Court right now. And those are periods of 4 or 5 decades, sometimes a century, of deeply, deeply conservative decisions. And they often didn't stop until the other branches took on the court that was, drunk on power, and dragging the country backwards through the years instead of helping lift it up. And we are definitely saddled with the former court right now.
Yeah, and that 40-year period that you're talking about, where a lot of progress was made, is that's what the Supreme Court is for. That's what they're supposed to do. And like conservatives, Republicans today would look at that Supreme Court and probably call them a bunch of woke leftists. But that would not even
them activist judges, yeah.
Yeah, they would come up with all kinds of. They would slander, like, oh, they're woke. This woke Supreme Court, like that's exactly how they would talk about them. Fight me.
I think,
but the reality is that's not even true. Like they were, there's a lot of conservatives on the court too. I can't remember now, but like that's the way it's supposed to be for the most part.
Yeah, that's the way it should be. That's the way we want it to be, and that's the way we think of it. But historically, that's not true, right? I mean, this is the court of Plessy versus Ferguson, right? Of saying separate but equal, of Korematsu, where in the United States of America in the 20th century, we rounded up Japanese Americans and stuck them in concentration camps.
Yeah,
and the Supreme Court okayed that. Right? This is the court of the Muslim ban, of upholding. I mean, it is a retrogressive and conservative body by nature. And, I mean, even Obergefell, even like the Obergefell decision, which we all support and rightly, I think, revere, and I will certainly defend till I can no longer do so. Right? The court did not lead the way on that. It came behind on public opinion, and barely we eked out a win on that. And now there are easily the votes. I think there are 6 votes easy to overturn marriage equality on the Supreme Court. And if you have been paying attention to the signs even before Justice Thomas's concurrence in the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe, I think they are coming for marriage equality too. So, I mean, it is. The Supreme Court is a conservative body, and it really is part of the problem that we as a country need to seek a solution for. And I get into that quite a bit in American Crusade, and I really try to explain that in the book and lay out at the end what we can and should do.
Yeah, and that, again, that 40 years was a period where the Supreme Court was actually giving people rights that they deserved.
Recognizing, now, I would say, right?
Like recognizing, yeah.
And expanding.
Now all we have is the Supreme Court taking rights. That's all they're doing is taking away rights. Like, and that's what they're going to keep doing for the next 50 years.
Yep. Diminishing equality, diminishing your rights, taking them away, robbing you of them, and doing that often in the name of religious freedom.
Yeah, it's frustrating. So, is it too early to get into Roe?
No, I mean, certainly not.
Because I think that's probably the best example in recent memory. Because again, this was something that the signs were kind of there if you were paying attention, but if you weren't, like, didn't have laser focus on it, you probably didn't notice. And then it happened, and everybody was just jarred awake.
Yeah.
What
I
do
mean,
you think? Go ahead.
I will say, like, you know, I felt like I was a little late to the party on that, but I was still screaming about Roe is going to be overturned for years, I mean, there were certainly people in the reproductive freedom movement, in the abortion rights movement, commentators like Imani Gandhi and Jess Peklo over at Rewire, who have been writing about this for more than a decade, and, you know, telling us that this was coming. Leah Littman and Kate Shaw and Melissa Murray at the Strict Scrutiny podcast have been talking about this for a long time. They didn't have a podcast to talk about it on, but I know for a fact that Allison Gill and Monica Miller and Rebecca Markert and Liz Cavell, who are on the We Dissent podcast, all predicted that this was coming for a very long time too. So there were people who knew that this was coming. There were lawyers who predicted it and who were trying to warn about it, but it was, yeah, I was still shocked at how many people didn't understand, especially even after the leak, that this was a reality. And I think that goes back to part of what we were just talking about, which is we do not conceive of the Supreme Court as a body that does that kind of thing. And that is something that is a myth that we have got to shed right now, or we are in real trouble.
They're also, another thing about the Supreme Court is there's not a lot of media exposure unless they do something like that.
True.
You know, they're not going on Fox News saying revealing their plans like Trump liked to do. They move in the shadows, and then it hits you by surprise.
Yeah, it's a very secretive body on purpose.
Yeah, so I think it's a big reason why we don't pay attention, because it's not fed to us. We don't know where to look to keep an eye on them. We got a super chat. Thank you, Dante. One of my favorite names, by the way. Under the current reactionary right-wing Supreme Court, is there a reason to think they will reverse the 1916 case, Torcaso versus Watkins?
Torcaso versus Watkins, for people don't know. People like to
I
think,
don't know. Please explain.
People like to think of Torcaso as a case about the religious test clause. But it's actually not about the religious test clause. It's actually about religious freedom. So if you go read footnote 1 in that case, the court specifically says that it's not deciding the case on religious test clause ground. It's on religious freedom. But look, I should explain the case first. So the case is, it's out of Maryland. It's a Supreme Court case, though. And basically, there was a requirement in place to hold public office that you had to say that you were willing. I cannot recall the exact language, but basically, you had to believe in God to hold public office, and you had to swear or affirm or state that belief in some way, shape, or form. Again, I don't recall the exact language off the top of my head. That was challenged. I believe he wanted to be a notary public, if I get that part right. And that was struck down as a violation of his religious freedom. And if you are with me on where religious freedom is going, that could certainly be a case that is in jeopardy in the future. It could have been decided on the religious test clause grounds. There's actually very, very, very little precedent on the religious test. So that's the language in Article 6, Clause 3 of the Constitution, which says that no religious test shall ever be required for any public office or trust under the United States. The first constitution to have that, which is pretty awesome. I do let me just put it this way. There is no precedent that is safe from the Supreme Court as far as I am concerned. That's probably the easier way to say it for folks.
Oh, man. All right. Sorry to derail.
No, it's okay.
Definitely want to get to the super chat, but I want to go back to abortion. Because I love how in your chapter 10, you talk about this in regard to the Hobby Lobby case that we were talking about earlier. And you talk about how the right uses abortion and like the right to the sanctity of life is, I don't think he used this phrase, but like a Trojan horse for their religious, misogynistic, sexist beliefs that are inherent to their religion, right? They usher that in. They don't actually give a shit about babies. They don't care. They don't do anything for children. They don't care about the life of a child. What they do care about is controlling the body of the mother. And you have one quote I'm gonna read real quick. Yeah. Abortion and contraception rob this particular God of his ability to punish harlots with motherhood. Yeah. I really like the way you put that, because like they see that like if a woman expresses her sexuality and she can't get pregnant, well, then she can't get punished for expressing her sexuality. So you got to take that away so that she doesn't have autonomy to her own body. And boom, that's it. Once you control that, the sky's the limit with what else you can control.
Yeah, I mean, their thinking is a Gordian knot when it comes to this, and that's partly because abortion was not a grassroots theological opposition that rose up in response to Roe. It was a top-down issue selected by a group of conservative white men to push back essentially against desegregation. We know this. I mean, the history is pretty clear here. I do tell some of that history in this book, and I think one thing that is very, very clear and is becoming clearer by the day is that abortion bans and restrictions on abortion are violations of the separation of church and state and of everybody's religious freedom, because they are deliberate attempts or the deliberate imposition of one very narrow conservative Christian view of sex and life on an entire country. They are at bedrock a violation of the separation of church and state. And this actually came up in the Dobbs case, in the case that overturned Roe. And that's going to be, again, that'll be in the next version of the book, but the update will be on my website, which everybody who buys a copy will have access to. So I explained this, and Justice Sotomayor asked the state of Mississippi, which was the state that had proposed the ban that was at the center of that case. She said, how is your interest, your state interest, Mississippi's interest, how is your interest anything other than a religious belief? And the state had no answer to that. They were selecting one particular religious belief out of the panoply, the vast diversity of religious belief and non-religious belief in the United States, and saying that one. That's the one that we want to have the force.
That's the hill we're going to die on.
Yeah. And I mean, that is a violation of the separation of church and state and of every single American's religious freedom. And that is something about abortion bans that needs to be talked about a lot more. And people need to be messaging on that a lot more. If you're listening to this, go out and spread the good word.
There's so much about what the Supreme Court is doing and with Christian nationalism and with what Christian nationalism is doing with the Supreme Court that is so inherently un-American or un-Christian, unbiblical. Like I think you touch on this a little bit in the book, and I talk about this a lot. If you're Christian and you're trying to usher in the second coming of Christ, right? You're supposed to be bringing in that apocalypse, those end times. And the Bible is very clear when that happens, that's going to happen at a time where Christians are persecuted, heavily persecuted. It's not going to come at a time when they are running Christian nations, when they've taken over their country and are running it with biblical. That's not in the Bible. They're not. You're not even being good Christians Like you should want to be persecuted if you should want, like, no, I don't want my laws in here. Like you should be wanting that.
I mean, that is probably one of the things that stuck with me the most when I was writing American Crusade, is that the Crusaders are cowards.
Mhm.
And by that, and they're religious cowards. And by that, I mean, they lack the courage of their loudly confessed religious convictions, right? Conservative Christians' own religion, as you just pointed out, tells them to expect tribulations, not to expect the government and the law bending to every whim and fancy they have, right? Impending persecution is like one of the few points on which all four gospels agree.
Mm-hmm.
American Christians preach, expect, and even yearn for that persecution, right? Like the fabricated War on Christmas is an example. The God's Not Dead movies, which actually have financial ties to the Crusaders, by the way. The Left Behind books, the Fox News, all of it feeds this persecution complex. And about half the country, this was a stat that just still blows my mind. About half the country and 3/4 of Republicans think that American Christians face persecution, which is, and according to PRRI, white evangelicals are the only major religious group in which a majority say Christians face a lot of discrimination. More than Muslims in America, which is just like so
Really?
mind-blowing.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Now I would be the first to stand alongside my Christian comrades if the government was really persecuting them, but that is not happening.
Yeah.
And Christians, conservative Christians, the Crusaders, the Christian nationalists, they must find the courage. They have to dig deep and really look for that courage to bear the costs of their beliefs, especially their bigotry. And because they can't, they're cowards, and their need for political power is actually feeding the demographic decline. And I'm going to build on that in one sec, but I just as I was saying that, if anybody saw Alito's speech in Rome in July after the Dobbs decision came down, he did this victory lap speech in Rome with the Notre Dame Religious Liberty Initiative, which has ties to Crusader Group. It's founded specifically by somebody from the Becket Fund, or run by somebody from the Becket Fund. It's a whole mess. I have a bunch of information in an update to the book on the website to American Crusade. So anyway, Alito is talking about this in that speech, and he talks about how basically there's this new morality, and no longer is anybody paying attention or giving primacy or supremacy to his conservative religious beliefs, is essentially what he's saying. And he's upset about that. So he's going to use the law to impose that on everybody. I just want to be like, dude, just find the courage of your convictions. If your God says that you have to be a bigot, just do it and accept what comes next. And if that's people not liking you, or you not being able to operate a business because it doesn't comply with civil rights laws, like, that's what the Bible tells you to expect.
It's a win-win.
Find the courage of your convictions. But their win-wins, right? Their wins, like in the abortion case, in the coach imposing prayer on other people's kids case, their wins swell our ranks. And this to me is like one of the key points and why I still have hope right now. Because they're creating this feedback loop, right? Mm-hmm. Their wins swell our ranks because white Christian nationalists are working to privilege this chosen few. Every victory they notch alienates more people. More people wake up to the danger, and more people are driven away from that. So, and remember, the whole reason for the crusade in the first place is their waning demographic power. And then they get a win, and then it adds to that waning demographic power, diminishes even more. So their power-hungry aggression is actually growing our movement.
It's backfiring.
It is, and so I mean, we are going to win in the long run. We really are.
And in response to that, they're trying to take away voter rights, take away education. Now they're attacking, the public education on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I've got a bunch of chapters on that assault. I mean, that is a core front in the Crusade, is the assault on public education. That is probably the oldest front in this war. They have been trying to tear down the public school system for a very long time, and it took a number. It's taken a number of different forms over the years, but school choice is absolutely one of them. Private school vouchers is absolutely another one of them. And I mean, that history is very, very clear. They're good at selling what they have as something other than bigotry, and an attempt to undermine the public schools. But that's very clearly what they're trying to do.
All right. Scary stuff. And they'll do it too. They will absolutely not hesitate. We didn't get to talk backstage about if you only want to do an hour or more or longer.
I mean, let's do some Q&A. Let's see what
I was about to say. Yeah, if you wanted, if you're good, I'd love to take. We got some good questions.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, y'all. I haven't been ignoring y'all. I've just been, infatuated with the dialogue here.
You can do it for a long time, but yeah, if people have questions, I'd love to be able to answer them.
Well, y'all have been active in the comments. I'm can't scroll up all the way.
Ask them again if you got them.
Yes. How many judges do you think should be on the Supreme Court? You touched on this on your book as well.
Yeah, I do get into court expansion, especially rebalancing the packed court that we currently have. I think that's a crucial fix that we need. No, I mean, it is a 6-3 conservative supermajority right now. Now, the typical proposals that you hear today are bumping it up to 13. I don't think there's a reason to shoot for the lowest possible number. I think that if you are going to make the court into a political football and you're going to steal seats, right? Like Mitch McConnell changed the size of the Supreme Court for more than a year when it suited his political ends, right? He dropped it down to 8 by blocking a nominee for more than a year. And then when it suited his political ends, he bumped it back up to 9. He stole that seat, changed the size of the Supreme Court to do so. He then rushed in Brett Kavanaugh, a man who is credibly accused of sexual assault without a full investigation into that. And then after 50 million people had voted in the election, which he swore, was super important when you're trying to put people on the Supreme Court, he jammed in Amy Coney Barrett. I do not think that I think that kind of thing requires not just correction, but it needs to be made an example of. That if you're going to do this, like we can't let that kind of thing happen ever again. So I'd be more comfortable with 15 or 17 or even 19. I am personally do not care how many justices are on the Supreme Court, because the more justices that are there, the less power each of them has, which I think is a good thing.
Speaking of Amy Coney Barrett, you had a quote from her actually that stuck out to me, and she said, I'm paraphrasing here, justice is, or the law is but a means to an end, and the end being the return of Christ. Like
the law, being a lawyer is but a means to an end, and that end is building the kingdom of God.
Yeah. The fact that we have someone on the Supreme Court saying something like that is just bone chilling.
I think so too. I mean, and that language, when perp, that's a good slip. When Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade to those cheers of Deus Vult, he emphasized in his sermon that the Turks had attacked the Christians and had devastated the kingdom of God, right? Us versus them. And it's that same kind of language. This really is a crusade.
Yeah, if you listen to any sort of rhetoric, especially from the right, it's all coded in us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
It's they're going to come and do the worst things to us, and we need to They're trying to justify any means possible to maintain their privilege. I'm gonna go off on a tangent now. All right,
Go for it.
no, I'm good. Monica again asks, any concerns they'll overturn Loving versus Virginia, which is...
So for people who don't know, Loving versus Virginia is one of those cases that's smack in the middle of that nice, good section of the court doing what we thought it should do, the court that we want, the progressive era of the Supreme Court, that 4 years that we talked about earlier. And the court said that laws banning interracial marriage are unconstitutional. Anti-miscegenation. And that notably did not appear in Clarence Thomas's list of cases that he thinks we should overturn. Without getting too far into the weeds.
So weird, right?
Yeah, there's something called substantive due process, which, as a shorthand that is not accurate, I'm going to describe as rights that are not explicitly labeled or enumerated in the Constitution, though that is too much of a shorthand and leans too hard into the conservative messaging on it. So big grain of salt on that. And contraception would be one of them. Abortion would be one of them. Marriage equality, both for LGBTQ people and for interracial couples, would be one of them. And Clarence Thomas listed those cases, but left out Loving versus Virginia in his list, which is also interesting because when he was a younger man, he was very much against interracial marriage. But you can go look that up and dive down that rabbit hole on your own. As I said earlier, I do not think that any precedent is safe from this Supreme Court. They gutted some truly major decisions, not just Roe this term. They shelved, as they put it, the Lemon Test, which plays a big role in state-church separation. And they did it in a way that is going to allow lower court judges, especially activist judges in Texas and the Fifth Circuit, to essentially ignore any precedent that they want if they can find somebody who has criticized it, or a judge that has decided not to apply it in a certain case. So I do not think anything is safe, and I do not think that people telling you that these other things are safe have a good idea of what the Supreme Court is really about or who is on the Supreme Court.
Yeah. What is it just today? That Lindsey Graham proposed the federal abortion ban. And when Roe was overturned, he was like, we're not about banning abortions. We're about giving the rights back to the states. And now he's like, no, we should ban them all over. But he's like, okay, yeah, we should make exceptions for rape and incest. Like, no, don't fucking believe that shit. He's lying right now.
Yeah.
In 2 months, if this got passed in 2 months, he would take those away. Like, you can't.
They'll continue to roll it back.
To worry about, but
yeah. No, I mean, I will be honest. I saw that news come across last night and this morning, and I have not had a chance to read up on it just because of how crazy my schedule is. And I did not get to see his press conference, though I heard he got at least asked one hard question. I do not understand precisely what he's thinking from a political standpoint. It seems stupid to me. But I don't, though I disagree with Lindsey Graham, I don't know that he is stupid. So I don't know what the purpose of that was. It's obviously not going to pass through this Congress. So I don't know.
It makes me wonder if it was a distraction or something.
I mean, I don't know. The 15, I think it was a 15-week abortion ban, has been in there. It's the next step backwards, right? What you're talking about, they're coming for everything, but they're going to do it incrementally. And I hate the end of Roe is just the beginning. Is the thing that I have been saying. They are coming for contraception. They are coming for marriage equality. They are coming for your rights. They're going to come for a full nationwide abortion ban or fetal personhood. They are coming for those. So there is, and this is. There is no amount of power or privilege that will ever satisfy the Crusaders. right? They will never be satisfied. It is a question of when we get sick enough, will we throw off the yoke that they are trying to impose on us?
I have a quote of that highlighted in your book. Hey, here it is. Once their crusade is successful, once conservative Christians sit atop the hierarchy, the mountain, and the privileged position gained with their weaponized religious freedom, they'll sue for peace. In other words, even after they get everything that they want, they're still gonna find something to bitch about.
Yeah, no, I mean they really will. It's I can't see an end to it, right? Like public health measures and civil rights there are two areas where the idea of religious freedom trumping good citizenship was unthinkable a few years ago, before the crusade was launched, right before 2010, but they're the norm now. As several chapters in American Crusade show, I have a couple chapters on COVID, a couple chapters on civil rights, and the license to harm others that is part of this weapon is not going to end with discriminating against women and people who can get pregnant. It's not going to end with discriminating against LGBTQ citizens. I mean, they will use it to try to reestablish white supremacy. And that was made hauntingly clear, by the way, in the oral arguments at the Supreme Court in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. They will also bring this weaponized religious freedom into every other area that you just are not expecting, including something we mentioned earlier, voting rights. Nothing is safe from this, and that is the point of a weaponized religious freedom, right? It can go anywhere for them. It can be used anywhere. They can reclaim their power and privilege in every single corner of American law and society. That is what they want. That is what they are seeking. That is what we are fighting against.
Beautifully
said. I get excited. Sorry.
You get me excited, sir. Mean that in the most wholesome, platonic way possible.
I took it in a very wholesome way.
Will we ever be able to regain federal protection of abortion rights or abolish the filibuster? Erica Fuller asks.
I mean, I think filibuster reform has probably got to happen. I certainly think if Mitch McConnell ever takes power and wants to do anything that the filibuster blocks, he'll get rid of it like that. I do think it's possible to regain federal protection for abortion rights. There's a bill right now called the Women's Health Protection Act that could be passed, which I assume is Erica's point about the filibuster. I think this is what she's getting at. But not as strong a protection as a constitutional protection. And every single fix that we have or that we propose or that we pass is going to end up at this Supreme Court. Every single one of them. So until we fix that court, any of those are Band-Aids that are going to fall off in a year or two. If that, especially given the abuse of the shadow docket, it could be a lot shorter. Got to fix the court first.
Our very own Courageous asks, I know 303 Creative LLC versus LNs is about free speech, but I'm really worried about how Christians will be emboldened to expand to other services for LGBTQ plus laws. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, so for people that don't know, this case is about, this is the case that I mentioned that the court took that is basically a redo, a mulligan, a redux of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case out of Colorado. This case is also about a business in Colorado, a limited liability corporation that does not want to serve LGBTQ people. It's a website design business. It's run or owned by a conservative Christian bigot who wants to have a license to discriminate against people her God does not like. She wants to be exempt from civil rights laws because of her personal religion, even though the personal religion does not really belong to the limited liability corporation. I get into that a lot in American Crusade. I think it's a ridiculous aspect of these cases. Anyway, she was not asked to make a website by anybody. No gay couple, no LGBTQ folks have approached her and said, hey, we want you to make this website. She's not under threat of being forced to violate this civil law. This case would be going nowhere, except that very clearly this Supreme Court wants to take this case. It shouldn't be in the courts at all because it's a hypothetical. And that's not something our courts are supposed to decide. So that alone is very alarming. And I get into this in American Crusade. I look at what happened after the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. Even though the Supreme Court in that case did not explicitly grant the right that the Crusaders were looking for, it sort of rubber stamped the bigotry in that particular case, but it didn't grant the license to be exempt from civil rights laws altogether. Didn't give them that weapon, not yet. In that case afterwards, there was a really fascinating study done that I explain in the book that showed a serious increase in discrimination against people in Colorado as a result of that Supreme Court decision, specifically in the wedding vendor genre of business. It had a marked effect. So we know that discrimination happens as a result of these decisions, and we know also as a corollary that these civil rights laws actually work.
All right. Well, it's a bit of a high note, I think. Sometimes
I mean, it looks like we have a crusader in the comments too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If the court is deciding things in the way that your God wants, that is like precisely the problem. Like, thank you for proving my point about abortion bans and the Dobbs decision being a violation of every single American's religious freedom by imposing one narrow religion on all of us. Thank you, blessed be ye.
And that's what they don't realize, or they do and they just don't care about the nature of the Constitution. It's not if for some reason Christians did become a minority and like our nation was taken over by another religion or something and wanted to persecute them, the Constitution would protect them. No one's going to force them to not be Christian. You will be able to be a Christian in this country no matter fucking what. That is there to protect you also. But it's not there to privilege you. It's not there to bolster you above everybody else. Like you're the ones on top, but if you weren't on top, you would be protected from the ones that are on top.
I mean, and that's one of the things that was very clear when the framers were designing the Constitution. They thought about what it would be like to be the minority religion. And they had that because none of the colonies really agreed on the different versions of Christianity that most of them had adopted, some officially, some not officially. And there were places where, James Madison looks at Pennsylvania in these letters that he wrote in a piece that I ended up also not using for the book, but which is on my Patreon that I sent out to my patrons a few months ago. And he looks at what's going on in Pennsylvania and he's talking about, oh, that's such an enlightened way of doing things. He's writing this letter to his friend. He's like, we got to do that here in Virginia. And then, he ends up writing the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which became the forerunner to the First Amendment to the Constitution. So, I mean, they knew what they were doing. And I do think, and I talk about this early in the book, the Crusaders know too what they're fighting for, because anytime any measure of equality. For instance, when a Hindu says a prayer to open Congress, they lose their mind. And all of a sudden they understand what it means to have a separation of church and state.
I like that. All right. That's going to be it for questions. I don't want to keep you too much longer. You've got a very busy schedule. You need a good night's sleep.
I do. I mean,
good.
I was just going to say, I do think if you were out there, I know people have more questions. I can see them in the chat, and I'm sorry we're not going to get a chance to get to them, but I can virtually promise you that the answers are in here. I would go pick up a copy, pre-order it, go get a signed copy. It's again, great gift. The answers to these questions and the answers to religious freedom questions generally, when law and religion are colliding, they're actually not that hard. I deal with them in like the first 2 chapters of the book. Like I lay out these lines as a framework.
Chapter 2, I think, might be my favorite chapter because it almost summarizes the point of the whole book in one chapter.
I'm thrilled to hear that, especially getting your favorite chapter early on that's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like if you have questions, go pre-order the book or go get it from your library. Tell your local public library to order it. Do that anyway if you're watching, please. That's like really helpful for authors. And then read it. And come back to me with questions. I'm reasonably available, not pretty much these 2 months, unless you're on my Patreon. But normally I'm more reachable on social media through my website and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, if you really have a burning question, he does have a Patreon. I think I linked it below. Can't remember. I'm a part of it. Courageous is part of it. Some others, and it's awesome.
It's fun. We're doing a hang on this 22nd. We're gonna do a Zoom hang and chat and shoot the shit, and people are gonna get to ask me questions. So
yeah, we do that. I think we're toying with the idea of watching a movie or something.
We are gonna try to do that for sure.
Like a bad Christian movie and just tear it apart. It's gonna be fun.
It will be enjoyable. It will be.
So before you go, I want to end on a high note. Do you have any words of encouragement, hope, guidance on what we can do from the comfort of our own homes, or by going outside and actually doing something that will help?
Yeah. I do think it's important to remember 2 things. One, their wins will swell our ranks. I am watching that happen in real time.
Mm-hmm.
That is a reality. Not to say we want to stand there and lose, but their wins are weakening them, even as they're solidifying their privilege in the law. Their power-hungry aggression, as I said earlier, is growing our movement. And there are solutions to all of these problems. And I get into the solutions in the book. The thing that everybody needs to walk away from this conversation knowing is that none of those solutions are quick and easy. And I know that sucks, and I know that's not what people want to hear, but it is the truth. If you are looking for a quick and easy solution, you are going to be disappointed. If you think that voting is enough to fix this, you are going to be disappointed. They played a very long game to capture the highest court in the land, and that court and those justices and these crusaders are now drunk on that power. The court, as of right now, remains unchecked. Right? We have a system of checks and balances. It is out of control, and it has not been checked yet. We need to expect a long game for ourselves. Right? We have to build power, and we have to win hearts and minds. And that is what American Crusade seeks to do. That's what I do every day in my day job at Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, what AU does every single day, what it will be doing for the next 75 years. That is what we have to expect. So this is not a quick and easy fix. This is a very long fight that we have ahead, but we, in the long run, absolutely will win.
And we have a secret weapon. We have Gen Z.
We do.
Gen Z is going to fuck shit up. when they get older. I fully believe that y'all are gonna save this fucking country, and I'm gonna sit back and just sip some rum and be like, good job, kid.
I'd be very happy. This is a really strange thing about working at a nonprofit is your goal is to put yourself out of a job, right? Like, well, church and state are separate, so I gotta go find something else to do.
I'm out. My work here is done.
But for now, thanks to this Supreme Court and this crusade, I do have, I hope, some job security. No, I don't hope some job security, but some job security for the near future. So anyway.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again, sir, for joining us. Go buy the fucking book. God damn, it's good, y'all. I can't even. I read it twice. Second time was more of a speed read, but it was good.
Thank you. I appreciate that, my friend.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sending me the copy. Holy shit. So thanks you guys for joining in. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and if you want to support Andrew further beyond buying the book, there's links in the description. You can follow him on Twitter. Keep updated with what he's doing, because he does a lot. He does not stop. I'm blown away. I'm pretty sure he has like the Doctor Strange time stone where he can like freeze time, and he can just write like a bunch of papers and then unfreeze time. Like, I'm pretty sure that's a secret. I don't have any proof, but I don't think I'm wrong about that.
I wish. I wish. That's how I get up at 5 a.m. every single day to write, because that's the only time I can do it. It's not a great schedule, but it is productive.
Yeah, and it shows. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Y'all know how this works. I'm really bad at ending shows, so I'm just going to say good night. Thank you, and I love you all.
Thank you.